Now the body is not made up of one part, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. This is from the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12.
Ko te amarangi ki mua, ko te hapaio ki muri. Tihei mōriora. Te kupu tuatahi, me wehi ki a io, ko ia te timatanga me te whakamutana o ngā mea katoa. Ko ihu anō, te ara ki te atua. Whaka honoratia te ariki nui tuheitia me tōna whānau. Haere nā mate, haere, haere, haere. Tātou te huna ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora everyone. My name is Karen Bishop and I work for the Kawhia Health Centre. He uri ahau no te waka o Tainui, kei Kawhia taku kāinga, ngā toki mata whaurua, te aroa mā tātua hoki. Kia ora tātou. So I'm Karen and I work for the Kawhia Health Centre, and I'm just explaining that my home is Kawhia, but I have connections to other parts of New Zealand as well. We begin our presentation today with a short introduction around the practices of traditional Māori weaving called rāranga, starting with the harakeke bush or the flax bush, which you all have probably seen scattered around the landscape. 100 varieties, over 100 varieties used for all kinds of different purposes traditionally. Starting at the beginning here, within the harakeke or flax bush, what you'll find in the centre of each and every one are many, many little family units, starting with, oopsie days, right in the centre, a little baby shoot that is surrounded and protected by two adult shoots, or we call them parents, and from then onwards, grandparents. First lesson in rāranga weaving is that the baby and the parents are never cut. They're preserved for the protection of that little new shoot, and from then on, the grandparents are used for the traditional weaving practice. From that little baby shoot grows the kōrari, or the flax flower, from which the beautiful native birds of our land come to feed from, the nectar. There is a proverb, a Māori proverb, that John is going to speak from today, that talks about that little unit of family within each bush, and basically says that you take the life force, or you take that baby shoot out of the centre of the flax bush, and that flax flower isn't going to grow. Therefore, we will not hear the song of the bellbird, the most beautiful bird in our native forest, singing. So it speaks about future. It speaks about the voice of those who would otherwise be unheard. We'll go into that in more detail later. From the lessons of harvesting and protecting that flax bush, you then move on to the careful preparation of whatever it is that you are about to weave. So as the weaver, today as the weavers, we're going to be helping to create a kete, or a woven basket, for you to actually look at. Starting with careful sizing, sorting, and then often the extraction of the fibre that sits within the plant, called muka. Without a good foundation, whatever it is that you weave will not come to be the product that you would like it to be, and so careful preparation is taken in preparing, in particular, when weaving a basket, the whiri, or the plait that's made from the fibre within the harakeke bush. These are a couple of examples of very well plaited plaits. And then from there, the weaving process begins, and sometimes the fibres are on top of each other, sometimes they're under, leading towards this idea of us all needing one another, one over, under, until the completion of your work. Ending with some really beautiful products. Depending on what you'd like to carry, the weaving process follows a certain pattern and fashion, with colour, with all types of varieties of weaving. And I think that's where I'll end and leave John to carry on. Thank you.
Just want to do the harakeke. You want to do the proverb? Sorry.
Okay. Hutea te rito o te harakeke, kei hia te kōmako e kō.
If the centre shoot of the flax is pulled out and the flax dies, where will the bellbird sing?
Ki mai ki a hau, he ha te mea nui o te ao. Māku e ki atu, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata.
If you were to ask me, what is the most important thing in the world, I would reply, it is a person, a person, a person. Okay. When I was a fourth-year medical student, we did not have rural general practice placements. That Easter, I went to stay with a friend in Roxburgh, whose mother was the district nurse and had lived and worked in Roxburgh for about 20 years. She invited me out with her as she did her rounds. The surgical ward that I'd been on had concentrated on the appendix in bed 1, the gallbladder in bed 2, and the bowel cancer in bed 3. But during my day with Nancy Craig, I learned how illnesses affected people's lives, how families were or weren't coping, and even how a cancer could bring compassion into a long-standing dispute with the alcoholic neighbour. I was so impressed by her understanding of and connection with her patients. It was all about relationships. Her nursing skills were the tool that enabled her to serve and relate to the patient, the patient, the patient. An interest in rural general practice was born. I arranged to do my trainee intern attachment in Clyde, Alexandra, and after graduating, did locums in about 20 rural practices around the country. I gained my membership with the College of GPs when I was working in Riverton. Nowadays, a fresh graduate cannot work in a sole rural practice without supervision. I carefully chose a rural origin wife, and we then spent a year working in a bush hospital in Benin, West Africa. At the time, I had little idea that working with 2 other doctors, serving around 1 million people with over 50% of children dying before the age of 5, would be a great training ground for where I now work in Kawhia. It cured me of the learned helplessness of needing the technology and support I'd assumed would always be there when training in an urban hospital. It was also a benefit to experience being a minority culture. I've been asked to comment on the work I was involved in when the college started to put rural general practice on the map and to reflect on what has happened 18 years on from then. Prior to this, few New Zealand graduates had ever entered a rural practice during their training, let alone considered it working in one. Kawhia, like many rural practices, had struggled to get and keep a GP. Also, like many rural towns, the health centre is in the old post office building, a reminder of the former life of rural communities when they were the backbone of society. We worked on a shoestring. A lasting memory is of how the receptionist would cut all the urine test strips down the centre so that each strip could be used to do 2 tests. The thrust of the college's recommendations was to attract graduates to rural practices. A number of changes had to happen simultaneously, and that the government and health funding agency, educators, communities, and doctors themselves needed to act together. Issues such as selection processes for and training of medical students, rural vocational training, retaining and recruiting health workers in needy areas, locum cover, the needs of the spouses and families, professional development, and after-hours issues were all addressed. I did not expect anyone to take much note, but to my surprise, almost everything we recommended has happened. There have also been changes that we hadn't planned. The loss of GPs from obstetrics, with the loss of the special relationship that GPs had of bringing some of their patients into the world, as well as supporting parents at such a special time in their lives, was already occurring. But the withdrawing of many practices from after-hours care was not dreamt of. One definition of a close friend is someone that you can call at 3 o'clock in the morning in your time of need. Many GPs have lost this altogether, or work in rosters in which they are only occasionally available after hours, and at these times are mainly treating other doctors' patients. When I started at Kawhia, we were aware of 12 diabetics in the practice. Now, if you're over 55 in our practice, there is a 50% chance that you will have diabetes or pre-diabetes. There has been an increase in chronic diseases in our communities as well as ageing populations with a growing need for palliative care. This, along with general practices now providing a lot of care that was previously provided by hospitals, has challenged us with the need to develop new relationships with both our patients and other healthcare workers if we are to address these demands. One strand of flax does not have much strength. It requires several interwoven strands. For me, one of the biggest challenges to my relationship with my patients comes from advances in IT. I know this should be a tool to make our work more effective, but often it feels more like the monitor screen is getting between me and the patient. The Maori proverb Karen quoted at the start of this address describes the importance of preserving the centre shoot of a flax bush, as this is the growing point. In the flax bushes of health professionals, it is vital that we older shoots support the developing shoots of students. The first medical students from Auckland Medical School to have a compulsory rural attachment were 4th years in 1995. They did not want to leave the urban facilities and the hospital which had more serious and interesting patients. The teachers would be largely untrained. But the students discovered the difference between hospital and rural doctoring and encountered patients in a new way, as well as getting to know something of the community that they lived in. Having a one-on-one mentor and the chance to use practical skills led to the majority changing their minds and becoming enthusiastic about the training. Since then, our practice has also had trainee interns and the occasional PGY too. I think the most important lessons they learn are not about medical conditions or their treatments, but about the importance of relationships with our patients. Forming a business relationship in which patients pay for medical service is a new concept after hospital-based training, but the real challenge is how to develop the sort of relationship that enables patients to share their problems and fears. We need to be able to challenge patients about unhealthy lifestyle practices without coming across as being moralistic. Students have also taught us a lot and have been involved in our attempts to connect better with our patients and adapt to changes. They have all woven something of themselves into the lives of staff and patients. For today's session, I emailed some of our more recent students, asking them if they had any stories of special encounters they had with patients, or of anything they had learnt that they would treasure in their future careers. Following are their replies. An encouraging reply came from Dominique, who had decided general practice was not for her during a negative experience earlier in her training. This highlights the importance of providing a positive experience, not just an experience. Raywyn's our main receptionist, and she's going to quote, read what Dominique wrote.
I guess the biggest impact from my time in Kawhia was that it was the sole experience that U-turned my route just at the start of my working life to aim towards rural GP. And this is where I have ended up. It wasn't one memory in particular, just a really, really great 3 weeks.
Sue, my wife, is going to read what Emily wrote.
Within a week or so of having arrived in Kawhia, Dr. Burton explained that he sees the GP's role as being part of all aspects of someone's health, including death. He explained the efforts he makes to attend tangis, even if this is difficult to fit in with a busy clinical life and family priorities. So off we went to a tangi, and I was overwhelmed with how I was embraced after being welcomed on. I was immediately asked to sit with a Kawhia who told me all about her British whakapapa. For the rest of my PGY2 placement in Kawhia, people would remember me from that day on the marae, and I instantly saw and experienced the importance of this connection in the GP-patient consultation room relationship. This experience continues to influence me today by ensuring I consider asking where someone's primary marae is, having practical knowledge of marae tikanga, and attempting to attend marae events where possible in the community I'm now working in. My time in Kawhia continues to be an example of the work environment I strive for, and is a large factor in how I came to work in the community I now am in.
Another student to comment on the importance of the relationship that develops during sharing end-of-life matters was Carissa. This time it was with a Pākehā patient and his family. Heather, our practice manager, is going to read from Carissa's email.
GPs have such a unique power to be intimately involved in people's care at home. My placement in Kawhia was one of the few times I've had a real role in ongoing palliative care, and I often reflect on my experience there. During my time in Kawhia, we had nearly daily visits to a lovely middle-aged gentleman who was at the end of a long, difficult battle with pancreatic cancer. One of us would pop in daily to sit and chat, share a cup of tea, tweak medications, and occasionally come in overnight if there were any concerns. Through this time, I got to know him and his family very well, and having seen so many people pass in the clinical, strange environment of the hospital, it was so lovely to see him pass surrounded by friends, family, and in the home he loved so much. Interestingly, I am currently involved personally with my grandmother at a similar stage, and am taking it in turns to sleep with her overnight, as is the rest of my local family. She stopped eating about a week ago, became unconscious yesterday, and is expected to not last much longer. I am yet to meet her doctor. Kawhia taught me that medicine is more about relationships than anything else.
One of the benefits of having a GP stay in a rural community for a while is that he or she discovers the abilities of other people that have their strands of flax that they can weave into the damaged fabrics that exist in people's lives. Other than visiting community health nurses, I used to be the only health professional. It was hard to get other health professionals to visit, and if they did, there seemed to be a suspicion of them by patients who were often away on the day they visited. We discovered that if we employed someone who already had the trust of locals, half the battle was won. An example of this was that if we had a diabetes nurse visit, there would only be a couple of patients that would see her. We employed Tui Ann, who was my main receptionist at that time, to become a diabetes educator. She had grown up in Kawhia and already had connections with everybody. She had the trust of diabetic patients, and they were happy for her to introduce them to the diabetes nurse. She supported patients through these interviews and was able to reinforce what had been taught in the interval between the nurse's visits. The on-site training she was gaining was later supplemented by her being accepted to train with practice nurses. The combination of her understanding of Kawhia patients and her growing knowledge of the medical aspects of diabetes resulted in her being of far greater value to our diabetes work than what I could manage with just an MBCHB. Unfortunately for us, Tuianne moved to support her husband's father, but we've continued to develop this model. We now have a team of locals who compensate for my being the sole GP. When we arrived in Kawhia, only 20% of women were up to date with their SMERS. My wife, Sue, used to be a lab tech, and we managed to get her into a training program that had previously been reserved for nurses so that we could offer a female smear taker. As our number of diabetic patients increased, we soon realised that patients were failing to make the necessary lifestyle changes. Raewyn linked up with Sport Waikato, who were keen to work in Kawhia but needed a way to connect with our population. She began helping people who wanted to stop smoking, lose weight, or get fitter. When Karen returned from Auckland, we asked her to observe what Raewyn was doing, but then do something entirely different in an attempt to reach our hard-to-reach patients. Karen now focuses on Māori health problems, and part of her work involves a day at the school where all of the children are Māori. Rini uses skills from previous mental health nursing to support patients with mental health problems. We also employ the public health nurse Donna to visit chronic patients one day a fortnight. Judith was station master for St John's, but is now using her personal experience with diabetes to help other diabetics. Our last student comments on what she observed about our efforts to do this. Raewyn will read from what she wrote.
In terms of what inspired me most about my placement, I think it would be the do-it-all nature of the job that you and other staff have. You are the doctor, the nurse, the social worker, the physio, the A&E, the friend, and often the pastor and counsellor, all in one. Your attitude towards the community is amazing, and I think everyone in the community recognises the effort you all go to do the best you can for them. This goes a long way in terms of helping them to trust you with their healthcare. There were so many patients who had taken a long time to build a relationship with, but you have persevered and were now starting to get some good results that you would have not believed possible in the beginning. I also loved the way you were involving members of the community in teaching others, e.g. recruiting diabetic support people for the community who were diabetics themselves. I was so privileged to be a part of what you were doing and would love to have stayed longer.
Some of our students have spoken fluent Māori, which left me envious of how this enabled them to so quickly get alongside patients and begin to weave with them. My father was a language teacher, but unfortunately none of his linguistic genes was passed on to me. It took a medical student, Te Aro, to teach me the mihi I use today. While he was with us, he discovered that there were a number of patients that, because of their fears, would refuse to see a hospital specialist. These same patients would confide with him. He describes one of the more dramatic encounters we had, as Karen will read out.
Although there are many special moments from my time with you in Kawhia, one unique experience occurred when you and I attended the Paukai at Rako Nui. Whilst listening to the whai kōrero, the emergency pager sounded and we were called to a car accident on Rako Nui Road. We proceeded down the road at great haste to find a van had rolled over on the gravel road. A van full of Kawhia planned to join the Rako Nui celebrations. Having been at the Paukai, we were the first responders, so we triaged patients and initiated our assessments and first aid treatments. Although I was an inexperienced student, I tried to work as effectively as I could. It turned out most of the Kawhia spoke Māori, and I was happy to oblige to do my assessment in the preferred language of the people I assessed. One curious thing I noticed, I noted was that some of the Kawhia had a fear of being assessed lest they be sent to hospital. I found one crash victim hiding in another van parked nearby. I'd been told by one of my patients to go and review her. Once the ambulance had taken a load of patients to hospital for further assessment, we returned to Rākaunui Marae. Some of the Kawhia I had conversed with in Māori said that there were other people to be assessed that were inside the wharenui, again fearing assessment and being sent to hospital. We went together into the wharenui. I spoke Māori to get the history while you did the bulk of the physical assessment. As a team, we were able to provide first aid to the appropriate people. For me, it highlighted a few things. One, how important GP relationships in rural communities are. In this case, we were welcomed guests at Rākaunui because the community knew you well. Because of this, you were at an important community event and the first responder to the crash. Secondly, it highlighted that within some groups, for instance, some of the Kawhia Māori, there was a significant fear of the implications of going to hospital. This was a major obstacle for them to access health services. Finally, it provided evidence that these barriers could be overcome by building the right rapport with people. A community's respect for a GP well known to them and the opportunity to be assessed in their cultural context, i.e. in a wharenui, speaking Māori in some cases, were tools that helped us to overcome those barriers. Imagine the story without a GP who was well respected and known to the community. We would not have been first responders, we may not have found the hidden patients in the other van, and we would not have returned to Rākaunui to incidentally find crash victims hiding in the wharenui.
Obviously, many of the students we take are not going to be rural GPs, but we see their growing understanding of rural communities as a vital skill for their encounters with rural patients in whatever field they pursue. The lessons they learn are seldom planned by us, but they just keep happening. Thomas offered to make a poster about the effects of alcohol for our waiting room for his student contribution to the practice. I doubt if patients are really inspired by such posters, and our waiting room is full of pictures from the school, thanks to the special connection we have with the school through Heather, our practice manager, also being the school secretary. Patients enjoy seeing pictures that a friend or family member has done. I'd heard that Thomas was a brilliant pianist, and so suggested he could put on a concert for the staff. When he realised I was serious, he set to work, delighted to rekindle a skill that he had all but abandoned in his efforts to do well at medical school. By the end of his time with us, he was able to perform a fantastic concert with no music score in our lounge to the staff, who on this evening somehow numbered about 30. He later put on a less formal concert for the parents of a girl who had died of leukemia. A piece of music had been written by her godmother in her honour, and he performed this too, discovering just what a powerful communication tool he had at his fingertips, literally. At a patient's funeral that I attended a few months after he had left, Ian's daughter told me how a doctor at the hospital had recognised her father and how he had wheeled him down to a piano after the ward round and played for him, to his immense delight. Sure enough, this doctor was Thomas. Sue's now going to read something that Thomas wrote.
The relationships that I got to create in Kawhia were ones that I don't get the opportunity to have in the hospital anymore. I'll always think fondly of Ian. I think with most of the patients in hospital, there is a huge disconnect between what we see in hospital and what people are actually like at home. I wasn't aware of this until I had my attachment with you. It was a privilege to be invited into his home to really understand how his life was. And even if I couldn't do much medically, it felt like I was doing a lot more by building a relationship with him. The hospital is a pretty sterile, unfriendly place most of the time, so seeing him there in one of his last admissions and being able to play him a bit of piano was a really nice experience for both him and me. Probably the biggest thing I learned through this was the importance of having high quality palliative care in the community to keep people out of hospital. For me anyway, it would be the last place that I would want to go if I was sick and in my last days. I would rather prefer to be at home knowing that I had a really good GP who could help if needed.
The last word from a medical student I'll give to Mel. If we are honest, we all have our prejudices, but it's fabulous when students make the discovery that when we weave our lives into our patients' problems, we can find that sometimes they can teach us more than what we've taught them. Not only are there times when our strand is on top, supplying advice and treatment, but the strands we weave also need to go under the other strands. Patients need to see themselves as the experts on themselves and take responsibility for their health care. Heather was going to read from Mel's email.
I think the memory that sticks out to me most on this theme would be the time I joined a group of women organising a day of physical activities for the older Māori citizens in Kawhia. I probably can't write about this without putting some of my prejudices, or otherwise, into the mix, so please forgive me. I think working in the GP clinic, I saw Māori patients as poor people to feel sorry for. I guess I didn't have very high expectations for them, even though I tried to empower them as much as possible. And when I went on home visits, I guess this reinforced this view. But when I met up with these women at the marae, I think it was, I was inspired to see a different reality. It wasn't so much that they were organising some amazing event or anything, but the fact that they understood and they cared and they hadn't given up hope. And as part of the community, they'd come up with something they could do to show how things could be and what health might look like in that situation, pointing towards a greater reality of wholeness, even if it wasn't achievable in that generation, and also loving enough to help these people they respected to experience more of what it means to be human. And so that image has stuck with me, because no longer did I see these patients as people to feel sorry for, but fellow human beings hoping and working towards a better world in whatever way they could.
And so that's our story today, folks. I will just close in saying that the little baby shoot in the middle, if left unprotected by its parents, still grows, but it becomes exposed to external environment and the things around it and causes damage. So a lot of the time as we're weaving, we actually do encounter damaged babies or new shoots, but they're still weavable, and I guess that's what we're saying that we do. A kete or a basket that hasn't been woven well, you can see very clearly with your eyes, but it can actually be unpicked and rewoven again. The foundations can actually be re-established in order for there to be a beautiful carrying vessel there. I'm just going to close with a song, if we could have the words up. And this kind of just concludes or puts a song to what we're trying to say. Kia ora. The bellbird sings a song of hope, a woven symphony, proficiently providing us a future melody. Rarangatia, weaving a melody that speaks of our home to me, Kawhia, the place to be. Family, community, foundations sure and strong, reflected in our history, on which we stand upon. Rarangatia, weaving a melody that speaks of our home to me, Kawhia, the place to be. People come and people go, adding to each woven row. How big the basket no one knows. Rarangatia, weaving a melody that speaks of our home to me, Kawhia, the place to be. Rarangatia, weaving a melody of love. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, John. Thank you, team. Thank you, whānau. And thank you so much for such a moving speech. I empathise and I'm moved by this occasion, so I'd just like to express my thanks. Thank you very much indeed. The next, I want you to stay, please. Just stay with you. The next agenda item is the awarding of an award. It is my very great pleasure to announce that John has been awarded the Eric Elder Medal. My only sorrow is that there is only one, and that I can't award everybody a medal. As a rural practitioner, I know that while you're the front for your team, it is the team that matters. The medal is awarded in honour of Dr. Eric Elder, an inspired rural GP who lived and worked in Tuatapere, Southland for nearly 60 years. Eric was affectionately known as the grandfather of vocational training for general practice in New Zealand. It was Eric who provided the vision and energy to inspire his colleagues, the local Southland community, the medical professionals and politicians, to create a pilot in general practice vocational training. This was in 1972, and we have certainly come a long way since. Eric's educational contributions were models of lateral thinking tempered by wisdom. He lived by the mantra of a continuity of care by remaining in his remote rural community for his professional lifetime. Eric Elder was a role model for quality general practice and an inspiration for those of us who attempt to follow his example. I can't think of anybody more worthy for this award, and I would like to now present it to Dr. John Burton, the Eric Elder Medal.
Just like to make one little addition to that. When I was working down in Riverton, Eric had recently retired, and my wife Sue was keen on doing some oral history, and she went and interviewed Eric. And possibly even more exciting, she managed to interview Mrs. Elder, and there's a whole story there too.
Tēnā rā koutou mō te tohu nei e wharekitia ki tō tātou rangatira nei e. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā koutou katoa. E tōru ngā mea